Welcome to the Vibe of Muscle Shoals Sound podcast recorded in the control room of Muscle Shoals Sound Studio at 3614 Jackson Highway in Sheffield, Alabama. The Vibe of Muscle Shoals Sound is brought to you by Florence Lauderdale Tourism. Visit their website and learn about all that the Shoals has to offer. The Hourglass came to Fame Studio in Muscle Shoals in 1968. The Hourglass consisted of Duane Allman, Greg Allman, Johnny Sandlin, Pete Carr, and Paul Hornsby. The band had signed with Liberty Records and were touring to support their new record, which, by the way, they did not like. After a show in St. Louis, they made the decision to go to Muscle Shoals. They felt they needed to take their career into their own hands and work at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals instead of Los Angeles. Eddie Hinton played on the Muscle Shoals tracks, and future Swamper Jimmy Johnson engineered. After they wrapped the session up, they grabbed their tapes together and headed back to L.A. When they went to Dallas Smith of Liberty Records, he actually called the Muscle Shoals tapes horrendous. The band was at a stalemate with the label, and so they did what all bands do. They went back out on the road. Duane Allman could not deal with the situation any longer, and he quit the band, leaving his little brother Greg in L.A. to finish out the contract with Liberty. As he made his way to Muscle Shoals, he pitched a tent in the parking lot of Fame Studios. In 1968, Duane played on Clarence Carter's The Road of Love. Clarence then called his manager, Alan Walden, and said, "Good God, Rick Hall has got this incredible guitar player." Rick had a core group of musicians that he used, the Muscle Shoals rhythm section. David Hood on bass, Roger Hawkins on drums, Jimmy Johnson on guitar, and Barry Beckett on keys. Of course, we know these guys as the Swampers. Some of the other key musicians at Fame were Spooner Oldham, Junior Lowe, Eddie Hinton, and sometimes the great soul artist himself, Bobby Womack. In Duane's effort to be the top guitar player at the studio, he did have one big issue. He could not read the number charts given to the guys. Jimmy Johnson of the Swamper said you could play a song for him on a demo, and it was unbelievable. We would be looking on the sheet, and Duane would have it memorized. There was one more small issue, and it was a regional thing. Duane was a hippie. David Hood of the Swamper said he was the first hippie I ever met. He had long hair, mutton chop sideburns, and bell-bottom pants on. Duane's long hair had given him his first nickname, which was Dog. And he always wore a dog collar strapped around his boot on his right ankle. Wilson Pickett called him Skyman, and the combination resulted in Sky Dog. We all know the story of Duane and Wilson Pickett cutting the Beatles' Hey Jude at Fame Studio, as well as the sessions with Aretha Franklin at Atlantic Studio in New York. Both these sessions included the Swampers. But how did Duane end up working at 3614 Jackson Highway with the Swampers after they had left Fame in 1969? He was still working here in Sheffield after the Allman Brothers band were recording and touring. It's actually a deep hole that Duane's contract situation fell into, and it took a mad scramble to climb out of that hole. Duane owed his previous management, he owed Liberty Records, he owed Rick Hall for studio time at Fame. It ended where Atlantic Records VP Jerry Wexler and Capricorn Records founder Phil Walden paid Rick Hall $15,000 to gain the rights to Duane's enormous talent. Rick in turn made a profit and paid what Duane owed. Just before Duane left the Shoals to go down to Jacksonville to start the Allman Brothers band, he worked with Otis Rush on his Morning in the Morning record. The record was recorded at Fame and included some of the Swampers, as well as the great guitarist Mike Bloomfield, who was then a member of Electric Flag after leaving the Paul Butterfield band. The recordings also took place just as the Swampers had tendered their resignations in order to move here to 3614 Jackson Highway. Jerry Wexler of Atlantic Records loaned the Swampers money to upgrade the studio, previously owned by Fred Beavis. Jimmy Johnson was quoted as saying, "Wexler had to loan us the money because we were musicians and couldn't get along." While this was taking place, Duane was trying to get his new band off the ground, and he still needed money while Wexler and Walden worked out his and the band's contract. He had no choice. In May of 1969, the purchase of Duane's contract was completed, and here at Muscle Shoals Sound, Atlantic had brought down their newest signee, Boz Scaggs. Duane was back and forth from the road with the Allman Brothers and Muscle Shoals Sound. He played on tracks for Lulu on her New Roots LP, Dirty Old Man, Sweep Your Own Front Door, and Mr. Bojangles. Ronnie Hawkins' self-titled release, with a highlight being his playing on the Carl Perkins classic, Matchbox. Listen to the track closely and you can hear Hawkins yell, "Go Skydog." Duane played with the Swampers on all these records. John Hammond, Southern Fried. King Curtis, Instant Groove. Laura Nyro, Christmas and the Beads of Sweat. The aforementioned Otis Rush, Morning in the Morning. Cowboy, 5'll Get You 10. That was the last session Duane played on before his death in 1971 at the age of 24. This is a beautiful way to remember Duane playing dobro on the Scott Boyer song. To read more about Duane Allman and his time in Muscle Shoals, and specifically Muscle Shoals Sound, here are a few to look up. Skydog, The Duane Allman Story by Shoals area native Randy Poe. Please Be With Me, A Song for My Father by Duane's daughter Gladriel Allman. My Cross to Bear by Greg Allman. No Saints, No Saviors, Willie Perkins, the Allman's longtime road manager. And Midnight Riders by Scott Freeman. The Vibe of Muscle Shoals Sound is brought to you by Florence Lauderdale Tourism. In these uncertain times, we thank you for listening to our podcast. Please follow us on Facebook and Instagram to keep up with this historic place in the history of American music. Let's close this edition of The Vibe of Muscle Shoals Sound with a quote from Duane Allman that speaks to these current times. Rock has never died, and it ain't never gonna die. As long as there's some place to go see rock, and someone who wants to go there, I'll be there to play it for them. Thanks for listening to The Vibe of Muscle Shoals Sound. We will be back with more stories from the hit recording capital of the world.